This is the D6 Generation Episode 1B. It is Part 2 of our two-part premiere episode. We recommend you go back and listen to Episode 1A first if you haven't already. You know what? On second thought, since we already have you here, why don't you go ahead and listen to Episode 1B first? Which will take anyone listening to anything that we actually produce. Should you somehow, for some reason that we can't really comprehend, enjoy Episode 1B, then why not hop back and listen to 1A later? Well, we thank you for attempting to enjoy this bit of entertainment, and I use that term loosely. Sit back, relax, and attempt to enjoy the show. And now, what's in the news? Recently, Fantasy Flight Games announced a new board game based on the Battlestar Galactica series on Sci-Fi. The game is due to release this fall, and may or may not include half-naked females with glowing red spines. We'll keep you covered on this as more develops. Privateer Press is releasing some new models this week, including the Master of the Hunt, Archer unit attachments for Legion, press gangers for the Pirate faction and Mercs in general, as well as the Krill Warrior Standard Bearer and Bagpiper. Soul tokens were also released. However, the highly anticipated Haggis tokens for the Trollbow players have not been announced. We expect Gale Force 9 will cover this oversight in the near future. Nexus Games has announced their newest product, due out the summer of 2008, titled The Age of Conan. It, quote, has a host of miniatures, a huge board, and innovative mechanics. Here's hoping one of those innovative mechanics is how to hear the lamentations of their women. And finally, Fantasy Flight Games seems to have solved the most annoying problem with collectible card games. They've announced a new concept called the Living Card Game. In this new LCG format, instead of random blisters as in traditional CCGs, new packs were released each month with only the new cards in them. In this way, players can get the newest cards without having to pay for cards they don't need. The first game to receive this treatment will be George R.R. Martin's A Game of Thrones. We applaud Fantasy Flight Games for this innovative concept and hope they can now turn their brilliant minds to the literary world and see if they can get George R.R. Martin to finish his next novel. And that's what's in the news for mid-February 2008. I'd give you a more precise date than that, but I've really no idea when this podcast will hit the street. Okay, so as we mentioned in our last segment, one of the things we noticed at TempleCon, or at least was kind of surprising for me, was how few Games Workshop players there really were there at the event, and how few Games Workshop events themselves were there. There was the one event on Saturday. Really, the weekend was dedicated almost entirely for the main venue, the main one floor there, to Privateer Press. And I found that interesting because, you know, I myself used to be a huge Games Workshop fan, to the point where I opened a retail store that only sold Games Workshop, and I had a website dedicated to it for many years. So I was really into it, and yet I myself have switched over to Privateer Press. Rafe used to be a huge Games Workshop fan. He switched over to Privateer Press. You played a person who used to work for Games Workshop. He switched over to Privateer Press. I want to talk a little bit about why, in a lot of shows, a lot of people on the air and also on forums, you don't want to talk about it. This is a dirty little secret. Well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about why Games Workshop and Privateer Press, how is Privateer Press eating in the Games Workshop market? Are they just brilliant? Is Games Workshop making mistakes? Is some kind of combination? So let's talk about it first. Rafe and Craig, maybe Craig, you can start. Is Privateer Press gaining on Games Workshop, or is it just me being a fanboy saying, haha, they're eating into their market?
You are a fanboy, and you do say haha. I don't know enough about the numbers to say if they're really eating in on a national or global level. I think locally, clearly they are. I would be the first to say that the only reason I'm playing the games is because all of my friends and the people that I enjoy playing games with won't play Games Workshop games anymore.
Those jerks.
They are mean. I tried to compromise and play everybody's game, but nobody will play my game anymore.
You're such a martyr.
I am
and
a
we
martyr.
Appreciate it.
I am a martyr. I'm regularly attending martyr classes, actually.
Martyrdom.
Every Tuesday. Every Tuesday night is a martyrdom class. But clearly, locally, at least in the central New Hampshire area, Privateer Press has all but completely crushed Games Workshop. Down south in southern New Hampshire, actually Privateer Press is only barely keeping its foothold around Game Castle and areas like that, where there's still a huge Games Workshop presence. But locally, and I think probably nationally to a lesser degree, they're definitely gaining, yes.
So, Rafe, being one of Craig's friends who has left GW and gone to Privateer, and you actually were the person who sort of dragged me into this particular aspect of miniature gaming.
Arch heretic.
What got you to switch over? How did you get involved with it?
Well, what I loved about the Privateer Press rule set, and it is embodied in the page 5, was, and I can only describe it in a negative way, I guess, was that frustrating time of playing, 40K, and I'm an Imperial Guard player, and, my opponent has this horde of, what are those little guys, Hormigons or something?
Yeah.
Craig, is that what they were?
Don't pretend you don't remember anything about the game.
I don't remember. And I'm this Imperial Guard player, and I can't wait to just use my las rifles. And he reaches, my opponent reaches his claws out and touches one, guardsman, and suddenly my whole entire guard army can't shoot anything because they're in hand-to-hand combat, and this Termagant and Hormigont line, whatever it was, stretches across the table to add infinitum. And the fact that my opponents would look at the rules and go, well, yeah, that's what it says in the rules, Rave, it just drove me nuts. And the Privateer Press, what I do love about it is it reminds me of wrestling. For every rule, if you want to call it broken, I don't call it broken, there's a counter move. Not for every rule. For every move, there's a counter move. And so, you want to shoot into hand-to-hand combat? Go ahead, shoot into hand-to-hand combat. You want to throw something out of hand-to-hand combat? Go ahead, throw something out of hand-to-hand combat.
So for you then, it's the rules.
Yes.
Pretty much, fundamentally. That's
what got me interested to look away from GW. Yes. But
right.
As far as the War Machine and Hordes on its own, no, I really love the steampunk type of thing. I do like the role-playing guide someday. I mean, we don't have any time anymore with kids and families and homes to play, real life, sit around a table role-playing games anymore, it seems like. But I'd love to do a little
we could just go online and make bread for hours on end.
Right.
It's pies. Like Coney pies.
You and your Hobbit pies.
But anyway, so no, I do love that. I liked Magic the Gathering too as a card game. You guys never really got into that, but this game reminds me of that with the Warcasters and the spells and the synergy. But yes, that's what got me away with it was the cleanliness and the easeability of play. I don't know how
you just
Privateer
invented
did it.
a word.
Right.
You know what, Russ? You know how they did it, and why don't you talk about the all the rules coming out at one time for every faction? That's a key.
Well, yeah, okay. So I wanted to talk a little about that, and I think there's a couple things that even our local GW lover, Craig, will concede that Privateer Press does extremely well. And one of the things I think they did very, very well, I think there's no doubt that Privateer Press looked long and hard at how GW does business and made some decisions about how they were going to operate to address some of the major fan complaints with the Games Workshop. And one of those things I think they did that was, quite frankly, in my opinion, brilliant, is how they release the faction information. So they came out with this game War Machine, right? And they came out with 4 factions. And what they do, instead of coming out with the, Khador, or Khador, I always say that word wrong, book, and then all the Khador players get excited and happy, right? But now all the Signar players have to wait 6 months for their stuff to come out. Instead, you get...
Or 6 years.
Or 6 years, right? Oh, look, we just got Orc Codex. How long has it been? For your army to finally get an update. And the other challenge as a retail store owner, as a former retail store owner myself, I've got to order all these new models for the latest army coming out from Games Workshop, Tomb King. So I've got like 3 months of nothing but Tomb King releases. So if I've got no Tomb King players in my store, I'm just ordering a bunch of new releases and I'm not selling anything. But what happens with Privateer Press is they come out with Apotheosis, or they come out with Evolution, and 4 factions. Every faction in that particular game system gets something cool. So when the new releases come out this month, it's not 4 new Trollblood models, it's a new Warlock for every Hordes faction. So everybody, all players of the game get something cool, and it's easier for me to justify buying that as a store owner, and it's more exciting for me as a player, because I know that new book coming out is going to have everything in it, and the book sells to all the gamers, not just the Orc players and not just the Khador players, right? Because that book has all the information for all 4 factions. And go ahead.
I'd like to add on top of that real quick the rules. So it's not, Chaos's, bike rules, and then you're trying to figure that out how it works with the Marine Codex that got produced 6 months ago. You get the cavalry rules, and it works for everybody the same.
Right. So they have that advantage, and they can fix things too. They can go in and say they can have that one book that releases all the FAQs for the 4 armies. And that's another thing I think Privateer Press does right. I think for many years, Games Workshop would say, we don't want to make an official ruling on something, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we all felt that problem when we ran leagues and events and tournaments. To the point now where I should mention this earlier, I didn't get a chance to give a shout out to my friend Yakface, John Ragul, who actually runs Daka Daka now. John has written up an 88-page, awesome 88-page FAQ for Adepticon this year. That covers, it's got really cool pictures of models on the table and little arrows drawing what happens here, what happens there, to cover every sort of contingency and every rule complication that exists in the 40K rule set. The fact that the fans have to get together and do that so you can have a competitive event in the game system just speaks volumes to what I think is fundamentally wrong right now with some of the Games Workshop games. I think you could get away with that in the 80s, and in the early 90s when that was the way games were made. But I think now players are starting to expect more polished products. I think it's gotten to the point now where you can that should not be an issue. I should be able to expect my rule book to cover the fundamentals. It's okay, when I have a problem with Privateer Press, I don't think everything's rosy. There's issues, right? There's certain models I hate to see on the table. There's certain warlocks or warcasters that are trouble for me. There's certain things that I frustrate, but it's a model. It's not a rule set. It's, as Rafe talked about, it's a fundamental rule. So I think it's one of the issues that I think that sometimes gets us in trouble there. So I think that's a couple things they're doing right. They're releasing things together, and they're also not afraid to answer questions and get FAQs. Craig, any other comments?
No, well, as the local GW fanboy, I have to say I agree with everything you just said, almost. I do think that it's the way they release all their models is great. I think the way that I, as much as it pains me to admit it, think that the basic mechanics of their game is more sound and ultimately more fun to play on a regular basis than Games Workshop, mainly because with the addition of a second die, you've got the luck factor is not quite as harsh as it is in 40K, where a single 1 or a single 6 can win you or lose you a game.
Right.
But at the same...
On that note, not to interrupt you too much, but I think the other mechanic that's brilliant in the Privateer Press games is the ability to boost.
Yes.
Right, yes.
Because
absolutely.
The boost mechanic, which is such a simple concept, allows you to make that critical shot really have a good chance of working out.
Yeah.
Right?
So there's the frustration factor is lower.
And the other thing that's not there is there's no lucky las cannon that kills you 250 points.
Right, that's that 1/6
that
is
doesn't happen.
Yep. And I also love the concept of the hand-to-hand combat not all of a sudden going from a really cool fluid game mechanic to a really clunky, chunky game of chess where nobody's moving and everybody's standing still and this model can't move this turn. I mean, there are certainly weaknesses to 40K that drive you crazy. And as Rafe was saying, or intimating, when you're playing a person who knows the rule set, they can use those rules. Their metagame is much stronger in 40K. They can beat you with millimeters and lock you in place with rules that don't make sense to you and that you weren't thinking of, and the stuff that you put on the table doesn't work the way it does in the novels, clearly.
Right.
But to counter Rafe's comment about page 5, I look at page 5 as a bit of a poison. I think that in all tabletop gaming, there's a personality component to it that is aggressive, and you want to beat the other person. And I think the page 5, which is play like you've got a pair, it's very simplistic, and it plays to that more teenage or adolescent element of the gaming community that you don't really want to play often as an older person who's still gaming. And like Rafe takes the page 5 and he's awesome about it, and he's like, that means to me I'm going to go balls to the wall and I'm going to play this model as aggressively as I can. But you take a large chunk of the younger gaming community, and to them, page 5 means I'm going to crush you until you're crying and you don't want to take your models out of the box again.
Actually, I believe that's paragraph 3 on page 5.
I believe that is paragraph. I believe those words do appear on page 5.
That's not even between the lines.
No,
that's
actually it is stated. And
I think it's even something like, "You Nancy boy, take your models and go home."
I think it is.
I think it even says that.
It does, and and you read it as an adult, and you're like, "Wow, that's tongue in cheek. That's pretty funny." And then you play some of these younger people, and they're like, well, you're not going to be able to beat me because that guy does A, B, and C, and I can lock down all that thing. And the next thing you know, your game is over before you even began, and they're laughing about it, and they think it's funny. And that element of the game, to me, is really, really brutally not fun. And that's why I think I do have a serious philosophical issue with the whole Privateer Press community. I will say that up front.
Now, Craig, did you run into that? Because when Russ and I were learning and beating ourselves, because Russ, remember, there were games, you'd kill me in like 5 minutes, I'd kill you. Yeah. We just thought it was fun, and we struck up another game.
I think Craig's talking more about the random guy on the street. I think there's the... I think I agree with you to some extent, Craig. I think, to be fair, I think that, I think, to me, what page 5 is really saying is, I think what Privateer Press is trying to say with page 5 is, look, we know when you put your models on the table, you're actually trying to play to win. So we've built these rules to allow you to play to win, and it really is directly in the face of GW saying, why do you have to have us make a ruling for you? You should be able to figure it out on your own. Roll a d6. I think that's what Privateer Press is trying to say. But I think it can be misinterpreted, as Craig is saying, to mean more, I'm going to beat you so bad, and I'm not going to have... and you're not going to enjoy it, and that's okay, because that's my job, according to page 5. And I think that is what... I think there's a danger... I think it's fair to say there's a danger in that interpretation.
I think it's part of the community, and it's not the people that I enjoy... I enjoy playing Russ, I enjoy playing you, Rafe, I enjoy playing most of our friends in 40K also, and all of you have beaten me plenty of times. And I can throw down with Russ or you or most of our friends with my hordes or with my Signar, and you beat me, and dare I say it, I'm even less emotionally disrupted than in 40K because of if you lose, generally speaking, you lost either because you made a mistake or because you didn't know that frickin' Vlad could do 8 million things and not be killed, and, I'm doing a great job, I just killed your whole army except for that one vampire-looking guy, and then you lose. But that's something that you can research and you can find out. But what I notice, because as an Alcoholics Anonymous admission of guilt, I watch more games than I play, and I think we all know that. And I've seen far more people I would never want to playing Hordes and War Machine than playing 40K.
Oh, man, I have such a different opinion of it, because I'm like, bring it. In 40K, they would twist me all up with some ridiculous, you can't hit my guy with the power fist rule.
All right, well, I think you're right. I think we're going to both agree on that. I think I don't want to beat a dead horse on this one, but I think the only other comment we could make is that
it just died.
One thing page 5 does do is certainly the last line on page 5 in Prime, right, is, and if you can't handle it, go play with plastic. And that line is clearly targeting Games Workshop.
I think.
So, unfortunately, Privateer Press is, whether it be tongue-in-cheek or not, there's definitely a little very heavy fanboyism. I don't know if it's as much as the Sony guys hating Microsoft, the Microsoft hating Sony, but it's there. There's definitely there are a few of us who can cross the line reasonably well, but there are people who, and that's unfortunate. I don't think there has to be that division. It's kind of like in the video game community, we talk about all the time, and we're like, look, why can't you just enjoy the fact that there's cool games over here and cool games over there, and why do you have to hate on the other guy's cool games? And I think that, unfortunately, the only negative I can see at page 5, I think it's fun, I think it's funny, but it does sort of set that up.
Right, I think it's fun, and I think it's funny, too, and I laughed when I read it the first time, and I think the way you interpret it and the way Rafe interprets it is great, and I have no problem with the way any of you guys or most of the people that I know play the game. But it fosters a community psychology.
But I haven't seen that. That's the
yes, you have.
Well,
Yeah,
Definitely.
you have, but you don't notice it.
Well, let's go on.
We're not naming names.
Page
so
5,
moving on.
I don't think page 5 is necessarily the reason that privateers. I think that some of that philosophy is important. But I think in addition to Privateer Press doing a lot of things right, I think we can also all agree, even Craig, that Games Workshop has made some mistakes over the past couple of years. And let's talk a little bit about, because I think part of the problem Games Workshop has isn't that this young upstart Privateer Press is showing up and eating all their customers. It's that they're losing customers to other activities for a variety of reasons. And it's not just because these activities are suddenly here. MMOs have been around a long time. Computer games have been around a long time. Card games have been around a long time. These aren't things that just showed up in 2005 and destroyed their company. I think that but I think we can look back and see what GW was doing in the late 90s versus what they're doing today, or at least in the mid-2000s, and make some kind of interesting comments about what they've done. And let's start with one of the things that I think is very debatable whether it's hurt them or not, but it's all the fans talk about it all the time, and that's price. Do we feel, I know when I ran the store, the Rhino tank started at $19.95 when DACA first opened its doors in 2000. The Rhino tank now is, what, $35?
I think it's about that, yeah.
The Land Raider came out at like $45 initially. I think it's over $60 now.
No, I don't think quite that
Or
much.
55.
It's 55.
It's gone up.
Yeah.
Quite a bit higher than the rate of inflation.
Yeah,
let's put it that way.
yeah.
So, do we think, is price a factor? I don't think it really affected Rafe and I that much in leaving the game, but do you guys think in general, do people look at GW as I know miniature gaming in general is expensive, but is GW considered the most expensive of the hobby guys?
Rafe, you want to take that first?
Yeah, that's a tough one for me to even talk about intelligently because I'm fortunate that I'm able to support my hobby without having to worry too much about the bottom line. So I don't buy a Warjack these days and then consciously match it up to what it equaled or might have equaled to GW. But I did remember when Russ owned DACA, I thought the pricing seemed about right. And I do remember towards the end of the heydays of DACA, the retail store, the pricing seemed wrong. And I think it was because they were jumping up so quick with price increases.
They had price increases
totally
once a year
yeah.
for a while there. It was
brutal.
It was tough.
Yeah, I do remember that feeling. Yeah.
And I'm not sure that slowed down any.
But it has,
Oh,
and they've adjusted it a little bit. My problem with the pricing issue is I think there's definitely a perception that Games Workshop costs more than Privateer Press. But I think if you take it on a model-by-model basis now, the argument, it's a lot like a lot of arguments over time they evolve. And it became Privateer Press is cheaper than it was, well, Privateer Press is cheaper because you'll need fewer models. And then it became, well, Privateer Press is cheaper unless you're playing like the games like 1,000 points. I mean, when you put a model-by-model comparison now, I would have a very hard time supporting or agreeing with the argument that Games Workshop is a lot more expensive than Privateer Press. Yes, the armies are generally going to be larger, and some of them are going to be much larger, and especially with the advent of Apocalypse, you're talking huge games.
Right.
But at the same time, we've saw Privateer Press events go from 350 to 500 to 750 to 1,000. And for the love of God, we saw Dave and Sid play 1,500 points last night. And I do think that at that level, the game breaks down, and you're playing model by model gets ridiculous with that many that many models. But I think Games Workshop did some really silly things early on with their pricing. I think whether they had to do the adjustments to make a profit or what, I think they dealt with it very poorly. I think their public relations element was really poorly handled. And I think that hurt them, and that makes people look in other places. And I think one of the genius things Privateer Press did was market themselves as cheaper long enough to hook in all the people that were fleeing Games Workshop.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think GW has a perception problem, and it may be also be a little bit of fact, because here's what I was doing research. I was all excited about the new Orc Codex, even though I haven't played GW in a while. I'm an Orc fan from day one, and I was looking at some stuff. And I was looking at the Storm Boys, and like right now, to buy Storm Boys from Games Workshop, it's a complicated affair. If I want to go get a squad of Widowmakers, or let's say Scattergunners for my Orcs, or for my Trollbloods, sorry.
Freudian slip.
My Trollbloods, right? It's like $35 for a squad of 6 Trollbloods. Now those are medium-based guys; they're pretty big models. $35 sounds like a lot, right, for 6 guys? But it's 6 guys, and that's that's a good size squad. That's a very competitive squad. It comes with the sergeant, comes with other guys. I could add
Right.
2 more for $10 more, but it's a competitive squad. If I want to build a squad of Storm Boys, okay, here's what you got to do right now, and this is something I think is a huge mistake. There's not a box you can buy from Games Workshop called Storm Boys right now. How it works is you got to buy a box of boys. Now, a box of boys, I believe, comes with 11 plastic models in there. And that box, I think right now, is $25. Well, that sounds great. 11 guys for $25. But then you got to turn them into Storm Boys. To turn them into Storm Boys, you got to buy the Storm Boy Upgrade Blister, which is $15 for enough bits to do 5.
Ouch.
Okay?
Yeah.
So I need 2 of those. So it's $30 plus $25 to build 10 Storm Boys. But that's not even the best part. 10 Storm Boys is not a useful number of Storm Boys. Because of the Orc rules, of the WOG rule and the head count and everything else, having anything less than like 11 models in a mob is just stupid. So you really need 20 of them to be fieldable. So that's where it gets silly. Yeah, on a model-for-model basis, 1 Storm Boy is about the size of the cost of 1 Scattergunner, but to have them competitively fieldable on the table, the price difference is substantial. And
Yeah.
you're right, I'm picking out one example, and there's probably others you go the other way. But that perception of having to buy those onesie, twosie, things like that, they got to fix that.
But-
they need
yeah.
to come out with plastic Storm Boys or something. They got to fix that.
Well, to counter your argument, you're talking about a game at a much larger point value where you're going to field 20 models. But to support your argument, that's GW has always done that,
Right.
and it's always irked me. They price by the efficacy of the model.
Right.
Oh, this model's going to be really powerful. It's going to cost more. Well, it's the same amount of lead as
Right.
this really fluffy, cheesy little Imperial Guard model. I mean, it's been one element of their philosophy that I've never understood. I don't get it, and Privateer Press does it pretty well. If the models are roughly the same size, they're roughly the same cost.
Right.
They've also Privateer Press again is another kudos to them. They've done a really good job of vetting their army lists to the point where almost every unit is fieldable and will do what it's supposed to do. So there's no units you look at and go, well, I'm never going to field that because it's going to be stupid. There's units that you don't want to field because they don't play the way you want to play. But there aren't units that are just stupid and dumb
Simply
and they're
not
never going to
usable.
work
Right.
and they're not usable. And Games
Yeah.
Workshop, every codex has a couple units in it that you're just wondering what they were smoking when they put
And they're
them in.
always the coolest looking models, too.
I know.
I really want my Mega Armor knobs not to suck. But they do.
And let's just jump in there for a second as the Privateer Press with Evolution comes out, because Russ and I were just talking about this last night. I think they did exactly the opposite with the minions, the mercenaries for Hordes. They decided to do a little psychological test on their Hordes players, and the models are the ugliest models I've ever seen on the table.
I agree.
But their
And
rules.
the rules are like unstoppable. Or my guy just appears in the middle of your army all of a sudden and kills 5 people. Oh, great. Oh, yeah, but it looks like a lump of turd. I mean, it's brutal, brutal, brutal.
The minions could use some work.
The
but they-
minion, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, it was insane watching those work
All
last
right,
night.
so yeah, there's some definite pricing differences. Now, another thing I think Games Workshop has changed over the years, and this is something I don't understand. The only explanation I have for it is that somehow they're having some financial trouble, so they're just cutting where they can cut. But it used to be, I want to talk about player support in general. And what I mean by player support is event support and just being there for the community. I think that, when the Rogue Trader system was introduced back in the late 90s, 99 or 2000 when it started, there were, if you looked at White Dwarf, it was like 2 pages of Rogue Trader events. Everybody wanted to hold them. They were only like $80 to run. They had cool prizes, and it really got the buzz going about the hobby. What am I going to build my new army for the next Rogue Trader tournament? What's going to happen? That whole system is, if it's not dead, it's on its deathbed, right? I mean, you look at White Dwarf now, there's like 4 or 5 going on. Even the GT system seems to be gutted to the point where they used to have one massive one, then they had them everywhere in the country. Now they're back down to like 1 or 2, and they're questionable quality, right? I mean, does it feel like GW is not real? We were just at TempleCon, which is really, as we said earlier, kind of small for a nationwide tournament. And there's Privateer Press from Washington State flying out to run an event there.
Getting really angry at the yokels when they call their super cool event Incalculable Bloodshed.
Right, but you're talking about how come there's no, why was private? Because all the privateer community that was nearby was excited because they're coming out, so they're getting the tables to the event, they're doing that stuff. GW, the only GW event there is run by a person who can't even call himself an outrider anymore because there's no longer any outriders, although there's something, I'll talk about that in a minute, gone. So, I mean, what do you feel that that's happened? Does it really feel like GW sort of dropped the ball on supporting events?
I feel like they went to where a lot of companies and a lot of different corporate endeavors end up going. They were the biggest boy on the block, and they got really, really egotistical about it. I feel like they decided that we owed them their loyalty, and they needed to do less and less to earn it. I honestly think there was a psychological disconnect close to the top and inside Games Workshop, and all of a sudden, we little minions were going to follow them around and go from codex to codex, and no matter how nonsensical their corporate business plan got, we were always going to be there. And I think they took us for granted, and I think as often takes place when people are taken for granted, when you turn around, the next thing you know, they're gone.
Any thoughts on that, Rafe?
I really like how Craig said that. I can't say anything further. It's
and I think player support dovetails into how a company supports its retail channel. And I think this is really interesting because when we started running DACA, one of the things we looked into was, cooperative advertising. Because really it's interesting to me, how do we as gamers get involved in these hobbies? You don't see television commercials for miniature gaming. You don't see it advertised. I mean, so for a minute, let's think about this. How does Games Workshop promote itself? How do they get new players into the hobby? And the answer is they don't. And what's worse is they used to do it somewhat, but they do it less now. For example, when you go to a website online, Rafe and I were talking about this the other day. When I go to a website to buy miniature gaming stuff, like any one of them online, there's hundreds of them, I don't want to mention any names, but there's tons of them out there, right? You go there, what do you see on the cover? What's the hot new models to buy on there? You're going to see the latest releases from Privateer Press. You're going to see the latest releases from Flames of War. You know what you're not going to see? You're not going to see a single picture of a Games Workshop model. Do you know why you're not going to see a picture of a Games Workshop model? Because if they did that, it's not because they don't want to. It's not because Games Workshop is not popular. It's because Games Workshop will sue them and shut them down if they put a picture of a Games Workshop model to cut off their ability to sell Games Workshop products if they put it on the internet, right? They did this back in 2003. So, first of all, what does that do? Well, first of all, it eliminates the retailer's ability to sell to a larger market than their local, so it makes it harder for stores to exist in general. But more importantly, Games Workshop is cutting off essentially free, not only is it free advertising, it's sales of their products. So the idea was, it was sort of cutting off the nose to spite their face. The deal was, I'm sure Games Workshop looked and said, well, look at all the margin we get if we sell through the internet on our site. What everybody knows about our site, we'll just cut off these other guys. And the problem is, now only people know about Games Workshop's site are people who know about Games Workshop. And how do you discover Games Workshop? There's only one way to discover Games Workshop. It's find a veteran player. And if you don't support that retail channel, if you don't keep your retailers happy and keep them having Games Workshop on your shelf, and you don't run events, and you don't let them put your pictures of your product on the internet, how are new players ever going to hear about you? There is no way. And the other problem retailers have is, what Games Workshop started doing too is when they sell things on the internet, they have little special bargain deals. You don't only get the internet. New army boxes will come out. You can only get there through their store. They opened up other retail stores near retailers, right? And you've heard all these. You've all heard the horror stories, right? And what those things have done is they've upset retailers in the channel, and they've stopped, either reduced carrying Games Workshop or stopped carrying it. And so I think they've really hurt their channel, especially here in the U.S. I don't know how it works in England. I think in England they have their own stores and they kind of own it. But the U.S. is too big of a country to have your own store on every corner. And I think they've really cut that channel down to the point where there's no way to hear about. I don't know how you hear about Games Workshop unless you find a veteran. What do you guys think about that?
I agree. I've never understood their aggressive attempts to be all things in the gaming industry. They want to build all their stuff. They want to sell all their stuff. They don't want any middlemen. They want to have every penny that's to be made for themselves, which I guess if you're the corporate guy sitting on the throne at the top makes sense. But if you're in the trenches and you're wearing a red shirt, which I've done in one of my many incarnations with the company, you don't want to walk into somebody else's. I mean, there were nearly violent confrontations at times with other local gaming stores and it was unnecessary. It was completely unnecessary, and it was underhanded, I think, and it was sneaky the way that they tried to do it, and they have established a pattern, I think, with local stores, with your friendly neighborhood gaming stores, where they would come in and they would say, "Hey, why don't you give us your data? We'd like to look at it, and we'll help you out. And then they would use your distribution data to choose where to put the next store.
Yeah.
There's no reason for any local store to trust them.
Right.
Sadly, I think that's true. And I think the other thing that happens when the another interesting thing about, and this ties into player support in the retail channel, was back in. They weren't always like this, though. It's cyclical. It's very strange, because in the early 2000s, right after we opened DACA, they were very excited about supporting the stores. They had the Bits Bus, right? The Bits Bus was a very expensive thing. It would drive to your store. It would sell Bits and Forge World in your store, and you as a store owner would get normal in the beginning, you'd get normal margin on whatever they sold. That was awesome. That was great support for the store. That was unbelievable, and that's when I was just, initially blown away by them, because nobody does that. They come to your store, you don't have to have any stock or anything, then they sell all that stuff and you get margin on it. That was great, and the players get to buy Bits, and they would give us huge Bits catalogs. Just remember those Bits catalogs? They were awesome.
Yeah.
Now, not only is the Bits Bus canceled, and that program is gone because I guess it was too expensive, but I think, looking back, it should be considered a loss leader in great advertising. Now, we just heard recently that big news is they canceled the Bits program altogether. So you can't even order Bits from GW anymore, which is something Privateer is kind of pushing into now with Bits. But I think Privateer does this part better, and they've really been strong about it. They don't sell they have no online store except for things you can't get through a retailer. You can't even subscribe to No Quarter, right? You have to buy No Quarter from your local retailer. And that little bit of them saying, yeah, we don't want to take that margin, that's for you, the local retailer, that's an important message to retailers, right? It says, we're going to back you up.
Yep.
We're here for you or us. And think about it. It's kind of crazy, because Microsoft is a massive company. They have billions of dollars to throw around. You don't see Microsoft stores selling Xboxes. They go through Walmart and all the other channels because it's crazy to try to do the
You do see
thing.
Apple stores, though.
You do see Apple stores. But you know what? I think that's... I'm going to have to get off topic, but it used to be Gateway stores and Dell stores. Those have all die off.
I remember the cow.
I know. I know Apple thinks they're in their glory, but I predict that won't last forever.
Well, I don't know. I think Apple too has a different, unique niche with the iPod.
Fair enough. But Apple's also at Best Buy, Apple's at Best Buy and other places. There you go.
See, that's why I think
anyway,
back on topic. Sorry. The retail channel.
So that was the retail channel. I think we've already talked about the rules, right? So I think to wrap this up, we've been so negative here, and one of the things on my podcast is I don't want this to be the podcast of hate. We don't hate anything.
Don't be a hater.
We don't hate. We love you. So Games Workshop.
I hate Rave.
This is our love. This is our little belated Valentine's message to our lost love Games Workshop. And I know, Craig, you've never left them, so I'll exclude you.
I'm still here for you, baby.
But, I've played Games Workshop forever. I love the fluff. They still have some of the best miniatures in the industry. They're the best fluff industry.
Horus Heresy series of books. Woo!
Rafe, what can Games Workshop do to win you back? What do they need to do to get you back into that hobby?
I don't know that they can, but that might not be because of them. It may just be because of my age and stage of life. Meaning, I think Ragnar said it best. Games Workshop made an army game. And Privateer Press's games, like Craig said, I didn't see the battle, but I just can't imagine a 1,500-point battle is actually working.
It's not an army game. There's no two ways about it. It's a squad game.
Exactly. So I guess what I'd want to see is rules as easy, intuitive, and flexible as Privateer Press is at an army scale. That would be really cool and win me back. And nothing beats the Black Library. I mean, those Dan Abnett books, the Wolf, Space Wolf books, the Imperial Guard books, they are just fun to read. I'm hoping this may be another segment for another show, but I'd like to talk about the fluff of Privateer Press, because I do like their steampunk fluff.
That's another show, Rafe.
Yeah.
All right, Craig. So, Craig, what do you think? What do they have to... Oh, sorry, Craig. What else you got there?
Your time is up.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
All right, go ahead. I'm done.
No. Anything else about that?
Well, I was just going to say, I do think that we're going to see novels from Privateer Press, but I really still like the GW novels.
Craig, what do you think?
I think it's all about the rules. I think they've got the best fluff going. I think they have the best backstory. I think they could take a little page from Privateer Press and advance it a little bit, but I also think that they shouldn't take the whole page and advance it hundreds of years with every freaking book that they release either, and make it so ridiculously difficult to follow the timeline. But I think they've got the background, they've got the fluff, they have got to break away from rules that were the only game in town in 1988. And the ballistic skill and the weapon skill and one die beats all, and that was great when they were the only game in town, but you've got to remove some of that luck, like Privateer Press has done. And I don't know how you do that without copying Privateer Press. Somebody's getting paid a hell of a lot more money than I'm getting paid to come up with that answer. But they've got to do that. And I think right now they are in a time frame where they can do it, because I have to disagree with Rafe. I think the Privateer Press fluff is getting better. I think everything about them is getting better. I think the steampunk stuff is it's very niche. It's niche inside the science fiction niche, and I don't think it's nearly as broad a draw as your generic
gothic
epic
sci-fi.
Gothic sci-fi, exactly. I think a lot of their stuff, and I know that this engenders some negativity, but a lot of Privateer Press stuff is just, and this is ironic considering how much Games Workshop stole from just about everybody. But Privateer Press's stuff is very, very, very evocative of Games Workshop stuff, considering that they're marketing themselves now as the big contender, which they absolutely are. But fluff-wise, story-wise, I honestly don't think Privateer Press can ever catch up. I just think you've got over 25 years of background now with Games Workshop. They just have to bring rules up to date.
What if Privateer Press had Dan Abnett? Then could they catch up? In that
No,
way?
it's not writing style. It's the depth of their history.
Okay.
All right, so here's what I think they need. I think they need really three things. I think they need to get back in touch with the community. And believe it or not, I think they're doing that. They've just created this new, they've brought back this program they call the Commandos with a K. And I believe the Commandos are the follow-on to what the Outriders used to be. I think they need that. They need an answer to the quartermaster. Privateer Press is a quartermaster. His job is to get the fan community going. This is not unique in business. The video game industry's been doing it for years. Xbox has a guy called Major Nelson. His whole job, this guy gets paid to write blogs and do podcasts about what Microsoft is doing at the fans' hype for what's coming out. GW needs this. They're working on it. There's actually a new GW community fan site they've set up. GW killed their forums. They're working on that. I think they've identified that problem. They're trying to fix it. They need to do that. But I think they need to work on how they market their products. They need to repackage them in a way that makes sense, that the units come in an affordable size box that's playable. Okay, I don't know how you do that with some of the stuff. Maybe they got to redo everything in plastics, but that's got to be the way to go. With Privateer, you get a box. It's got the rules in it. It's got the little card, right? It's got the number of guys you need to play. It's totally playable. Jim needs to figure that out. And lastly, they need to take the rules that they have now, and they need to put them over to specialist games. I'm telling you right now, they need to take everything that's 40K right now and move it over to specialist games so it's still quote-unquote supported, and eventually retire it. And they need to redo the entire 40K rule set from the ground up. 40K is a 25-year-old game, and it shows. Okay?
Yeah.
There are 3 games in there. There's a rule set for shooting, there's a rule set for hand-to-hand combat, and there's a rule set for vehicles. And those 3 games don't play together well. That needs to be thrown out and completely redesigned in a much simpler, more straightforward system. The way you damage a vehicle needs to be the same as the way you damage a monstrous creature, needs to be the same as the way you damage a little guy. All that stuff needs to be worked through and simplified. And they can call it something different. You don't want to kill the fans that love it right now. So leave the current rule set the way it is. Come up with a new rule set called 40K Tournament or 40K Ardboy or 40K something, and redo it from the ground up. If 5th edition is just 4th edition with tweaks, they're wasting their time, in my opinion. It's not going to matter.
Well said.
You know what I have to say about that, Russ?
Yeah.
They should hire you. That was brilliant.
You should be their Major Nelson.
Russ Winkler, Nashua, New Hampshire, and it costs you $10,000 a day, and I'll be happy to help you, Games Workshop. That's my consulting fee. But that's what I think. I think all of us made pretty good points in that. So that's our podcast number 1. Any other comments to take us out here, gentlemen?
No. I got nothing.
Nothing. All right, well, that's podcast number 1. It's in the can, Rafe.
my last comment is when you move the microphone around, it sounds like farting. Other than that,
It does. Can you hear
No,
sound?
that's actually that's the Taco Bell I had before.
Oh, God. It's getting so... We got to end this thing. Okay. Good night, everybody.
But did you ever
Good night.
notice? You ever notice how most gamer shirts are black? I never really understood that. Black doesn't really go with anything I own. But yet, almost every shirt at every event you've ever gone to has been black. Sure, there have been a couple changes, a couple deviations from that. There was a Games Workshop event. There was turquoise, I think. Games Day a few years ago was tan, and of course there's always the pink shirts because everybody likes to think that their girlfriend or wife would like to have a Games Day t-shirt. They never get worn. But those shirts that we buy, they're always black. And I'm always wondering, why black? My first thought is we like to have a connection with things that are sinister or mysterious. You've got the Men in Black, you've got the Black Knight, you've got the black hat worn by the bad guy in almost every cowboy movie imaginable. But when you think about it, you're talking about a group of people who are really only ever threatening to maybe a beauty pageant queen at a bachelorette auction. Nobody else is going to be really threatened by us. Is it a fashion choice? Are these people wearing black because it goes with everything? I don't know. Could it be that it's easier to hide food stains? Black certainly hides most food stains, especially dark foods like strawberry sauce and things like that. And yet at the same time, these are people who are generally living in their parents' basements, really close to the laundry, so that doesn't make sense either. Ultimately, what I think it is inertia. We started wearing black shirts. In fact, probably some proto-geek millions of years ago crawled out of the primordial ooze with a black shirt on, and we've been wearing black shirts ever since. I don't know. It's just one of those things you think about, you know what I mean? Although what I do know is that black is never a good color for anybody with any form of scalp condition.
You've been listening to the D6 Generation. Perhaps you and one other person actually made it to the end of this broadcast, and we thank you. If you'd like to leave us any kind of feedback or comments on how you feel about this episode, you can either do so at dakadaka.com under DACA Discussions near the top of the forum. You'll see a thread dedicated to the latest episode. Or you can send us email to the D6generation@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Hopefully you're still awake. Good night.